All right, hello everybody. This is Antonio Wolf. We are continuing the science of logic, the concept. We are moving on to section B of the chapter, the concept, which is the particular. Last time we read the section on the universal. The main takeaway of that is that the universal, in being universal, because it subsumes its moments, and because they are within it, the universal is itself in itself, therefore makes itself a moment of itself. This harkens back to actually what's in chapter 3 as the being for self. But this distinction nonetheless is a distinction, and therefore the universal is faced with the universal within it, and so the universal becomes an or a universal. And that distinction is the distinction which brings us to the particular. So, the particular concept. Determinateness as such belongs to being and the qualitative. As determinateness of the concept, it is particularity. It is not a limit, as if it were related to an other beyond it, but is rather, as just shown, the universal's own immanent moment. In particularity, therefore, the universal is not in an other, but simply and solely with itself. The particular contains the universality that constitutes its substance. The genus is unaltered in its species. These do not differ from the universal, but only from each other. The particular has one and the same universality as the other particulars to which it is related. The diversity of these particulars, because of their identity with the universal, is as such at the same time universal. It is totality. The particular, therefore, does not only contain the universal, but exhibits it also through its determinateness. Accordingly, the universal constitutes a sphere that the particular must exhaust. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just the dispersed difference from which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex and an unconstrained contingent completeness. But diversity passes over into opposition, into an immanent connection of diverse moments. Particularity, however, because it is universality, is this immanent connection not by virtue of a transition, but in and for itself. It is totality intrinsically and simple determinateness essential principle. It has no other determinateness than that posited by the universal itself, and resulting from it in the following manner. All right, let me reread that. Starting from the top of the particular contains the universal that constitutes its substance. The genus is unaltered in its species. These do not differ from the universal, but only from each other. The particular has one and the same universality as the other particulars to which it is related. The diversity of these particulars, because of their identity with the universal, is as such at the same time universal. It is totality. So, here's a reversal happening. The diversity of these particulars, because of their identity with the universal, is as such at the same time universal. It is totality. The particular, therefore, does not only contain the universal, but exhibits it also through its determinateness. Accordingly, the universal constitutes a sphere that the particular must exhaust. So my thought in this is that the diversity of these particulars, because of their identity with the universal, is as such at the same time universal. It is totality. One way that it seems you could see this is that the particular still is a universal determination which does not specify anything yet. You go from the apple to an apple. Well, you still haven't specified any specific. The particular, therefore, does not only contain the universal, but exhibits it also through its determinateness. And this perhaps looks, and to the regular way that people put it, should look very weird, because the usual understanding is that the universal contains the particular. How could the particular contain the universal? But exhibits, so it does not only contain the universal, but exhibits it also through its determinateness. Again, to bring the example of the apple to an apple, the particular, therefore, so an apple could be any particular apple, no specific individual apple. An apple must carry forth within it, if you put this in terms of substance, I suppose, in that conceptual frame. An apple obviously is an apple by virtue of the substance of whatever the apple universally is. So that may be one way that you can make sense of that containment of the universal, and also in how that containment is also through its determinateness. Determinateness is being by not being, or a being which is also a non-being, and that's only possible with a relationship which is an otherness. But the one that has a relationship at this point is the particular to the particular, and not the particular to the universal, or at least the concrete universal. The particular has a particular relationship to the abstract universal, because the abstract universal itself is a particular in relationship to its particular. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just the dispersed difference from which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex in an unconstrained contingent completeness. Okay, there. This totality inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness. Okay, accordingly, the universal constitutes a sphere of that the particular must exhaust. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just a dispersed difference for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex in an unconstrained contingent completeness. So it seems to me what's going on here is this is the point in which at least the particular as particular seems to becoming into some distinction with the universal as such. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, so the determinateness, what it is to be particular, excuse me. So what it is to be particular, what is to be existent particular, is to be diverse. This totality appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are and no more of them.
Your audio is cutting out.
Testing. Hello.
Good now.
Okay, maybe it's probably the server. I'll need to figure out that out later. I know sometimes like the servers for whatever reason start screwing up. So in this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just a dispersed difference for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex and an unconstrained contingent completeness.
I think one thing he's saying, this is like imagining or thinking of universal particularity, where in each thing being particular, it forms a complete diverse set. Like they each accomplish their particularity solely by being particular. And so
what I'm thinking is what I'm thinking here is but what I'm thinking here is this seems to me like a move to this is a indefinitude of the particular, in which, in this respect the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, so the particular is just, its diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply as there are no, insofar as there are no more of them. The diversity, as diversity is complete once, there are no more, quantitatively speaking. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just a dispersed difference for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex in an unconstrained contingent completeness. How this makes sense to me is that this may be that in the particularity of anything, from the particularity as such, there doesn't seem to be a standard, or really there can't be a standard from deriving the totality of the particulars from the particular as particular itself. Like maybe in a way to think it is from the particularity of any apple, you can't derive from that the totality of all particular apples, and therefore get that both quantitative and qualitative universality as a completeness of their diversity, right? Or like dogs, from the particularity of any dog, or even the principle of particularity, you cannot therefore derive the complete diversity of what dogs are. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes a bit of sense to me, where it's like considering the particular as particular. What makes it particular is just its particularity. So there is nothing it, so to speak, has in common with other particulars that would unite them.
Yeah, besides being particular.
Particular. Yeah.
So there's no inner standard or principle available for them. For their diversity is just the dispersed difference for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex in an unconstrained contingent completeness. So that would make sense of the contingent completeness here. DM, right in the Science of Logic channel. But I will answer your questions. DM asks, how would one derive the universality of dogs? Could you recapitulate the steps in order to think that in the concretely universal sense, the way you would derive the universality of dogs is you would look upon the self-generation of the species as a whole and look at the entire life process. Plus, of course, the embodiment and all that jazz. That would be the concrete universal. How would you arrive at the abstract universal? Well, abstractly. You would pick out some qualities or others in which you say, okay, this is a thing that I think all of these things have in common, and I will make this the universal. And then I will... Any differences that come about, those will be the particular speciations of that universal genus. The way I was thinking of it's starting to make more sense. Okay, because in this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. But the particular, because it is a form of finitude, there can always be a before and there could always be an after. So there could always be more particulars of a universal. So at any time that you have completeness, it's only a contingent completeness. It's not a necessary completeness in that matter. There can always be more particulars.
Yeah, if it's regarding in this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. That just means that this one's particular, and there's not another one of it, so it retains its particularity. If there was two of them, then there'd be a universality.
I do have a question. So I do have a question I'm curious about when it comes to determining this. And when you talk about, I think you said a contingent completeness. Do you mean something to the effect that the universal of, say, dog, we find like what we think contingently is like the universal dog characteristic, that universal is itself predicated on the contingent of, there being dogs, say, or I don't know if that makes sense, because that would still be a contingent way of looking at a universal. But I'm curious how we determine a universal. Even I don't know. I guess it's just weird because like I could point to I suppose any particular and say, oh, well that particular, if I can get to the absolute of that thing, that would be universal in and of itself. I don't know, am I on the right track for this, or?
I think that's a different question, because here the question is what is the distinction here between the abstract universal and the particular, in which or rather, and as well as the universal concretely, and the particular, in which the particular here is the universal, but it's the universal as determinate. So accordingly, the particular therefore does not only contain the universal, but exhibits it also through its determinateness. Accordingly, the universal constitutes a sphere that the particular must exhaust. So the particular here is going beyond abstract universality. It's not just the apple, but it's an apple. This totality, in as much as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness.
Okay, so I have an idea to recapitulate this. Tell me if this seems consistent. So, like, if I think about the cause of, say a ball being thrown, right? Well, I mean, there's many causes. or like for the whole instance of what happened, there's me throwing the ball, there's like things, such as air current, all of that stuff. The totality of all those particulars that actually affect the determination, is that how I'm supposed to think about this?
Concerning this, that would be like, okay, take that example and put it particularly towards gravity, and you see a particular gravitational instantiation, and you see all these other particular gravitational instantiations. The particulars would, the diversity of these particulars, because of their identity with the universal, is at such the same time universal. It is totality. So the particularity of these is a totality. The particular, but this totality, in as much as the determinateness of the particulars taken as mere diversity appears as completeness.
Yeah, I think the way to understand that is that the particulars are mutually exclusive. So insofar as there's exclusivity as such, that's the universality of particulars. But the particulars, because they're exclusive of one another, are particular.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. That's how they become diverse, and it's that diversity, as much determinants of the particular state as mere diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them.
Yeah, so particularity is always complete insofar as it is just particular.
Okay. And so the question was to, I think, what is it? Abstract and concrete particularity.
No, here it's between abstract universality, which is also a shifting between universal, concrete universality, and particularity here. Because particularity here is taking a step beyond abstract universality, but universality is still universality. So it's what's in the particular has to be the universal. It has to be, the whole thing has to be playing out. But
yeah.
So the particular is universal. So we're trying to make sense of like, how is the particular universal?
Okay. I get you. And then okay, and then so wait, would abstract universality be like thinking about would it be thinking about what's universal as universal?
Yeah, it's the universal without distinctions. So
Okay.
it's just the apple, not an apple.
I got you. Okay, this makes sense to me.
Yeah, what you mentioned, Rain, I hadn't even thought about that. That seems to also be involved here. That the particular as particular, insofar as there is no other of it, itself becomes a universal. But I was thinking more in the sense of just the particulars in the total plurality, the total diversity. So all apples as opposed to the apple, and so the diversity is complete, or the particularity is complete insofar as the totality of all the apples can actually be attained. But that is, insofar as that is attained, there is no inner standard or principle available for them. For their diversity is just the dispersed difference for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex in an unconstrained contingent completeness. Still thinking about that one, but
That's tricky. The unconstrained contingent completeness part. Usually when I think contingent, I think it has something dependent on another for it to be what it is. Although the way he uses it here, it sounds like he's saying something that lacks any dependence on anything else. But that means it has no internal standard, so to speak. And so it's in itself arbitrary, but it's complete because it is supposed to be that arbitrariness directly as a particular.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think about that a bit more. But diversity passes over into opposition, into an immanent connection of diverse moments. So this is the particulars relating to each other as particulars. Particularity, however, because it is universality, is its immanent connection, not by virtue of a transition, but in and for itself. It is totality intrinsically and simple determinateness essential principle. It has no other determinateness than that posited by the universal itself and resulting from it in the following manner. The particular is the universal itself, but it is its difference or reference to an other, its outwardly reflecting shine. But there is no other at hand from which the particular would be differentiated than the universal itself. The universal determines itself, and so is itself the particular. The determinateness is its difference. It is only differentiated from itself. Its species are therefore only A, the universal itself, and B, the particular. The universal is as concept itself and its opposite, and this opposite is in turn the universal itself as its positive determinateness. The universal overreaches it, and in it is with itself. Thus it is the totality and the principle of its diversity, which is determined wholly and solely through itself. Okay, so this recalls back to what we read last time, in which the universal, because it is self-identical, posits a difference yet cancels that difference within itself, obviously because it's also beyond the sphere of essence, the concept. Whatever is identical in the concept also is a self-difference there, but since the concept is the overarching universal, which is self-contained, it cannot refer to an other outside of itself, rather it refers to itself in itself. So the universal has the universal within itself, that's how it can be self-identical. But since this is also a reflexive difference, this creates a structure of the universal in difference to itself, which makes it determinate. So the universal, a universal. That determinateness is the particularity. But then the particularity also seems to enact this as well, from one perspective, in that the particular is the universal itself, but it is its difference or reference to an other, its outwardly reflecting shine. So the universal determines itself, and so is itself the particular. The determinateness is its difference. It is only differentiated from itself. Its species are therefore only A, the universal itself, and B, the particular. The universal is as concept itself and its opposite, and this opposite is in turn the universal itself as its positive determinateness. So the opposite, the universal is the concept itself and its opposite. So it's the universal and the particular. The universal posits the particular. This opposite is in turn the universal itself as its positive determinateness. The universal overreaches it, and in it is with itself. Thus it is the totality and the principle of its diversity, which is determined wholly and solely through itself. And this is where the universal is concretizing.
How would we describe what concretizing means? Like, to me, when I think of what's concrete, it feels like it's like close, like it's immediate, it's like directly, like, in my face, right? That's kind of how I envision the process of that. I don't know if you would have a better way of putting it though.
No, I would put it nearly the opposite. Hegel means implicitly something very similar, but explicitly something very, very different, nearly the opposite, in which concretization is something very solid. It's like a spider web. It's like the spider web. The more nodes and connections you make, the more solid it gets, the stronger it is, the more concrete.
Okay, I see what you mean. Because like what I'm thinking of as concrete, Hegel would just term the appearance, right?
Yeah, that's just an immediacy. It's just an appearance.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense.
Now, appearances are concrete. The problem is that you, when you immediately encounter them, don't know their concreteness. So their concreteness, as you know them, is just an appearance.
Yeah. So it's like, it's like they're concrete, but I don't have I haven't really internalized them as concrete, and I guess like people confuse maybe the immediate for the concrete.
Yeah, particularly the sensuous immediate.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So, all right, let's continue. There is therefore no other true logical division than this, that the concept sets itself on one side as the immediate, indeterminate universality. It is this very indeterminateness that makes its determinateness, or that it is a particular. The two are both a particular and are therefore coordinated. Both as particular are also determinate as against the universal, and in this sense they are subordinated to it. But even this universal, as against which the particular is determined, is for that reason itself also just one of the opposing sides. When we speak of two opposing sides, we must repeat that the two constitute the particular, not just together, as if they were alike in being particular only for external reflection, but because the determinateness over against each other is at the same time essentially only one determinateness. It is the negativity which in the universal is simple. Okay, so this is getting clearer than the first paragraph we were mulling over. Rereading it. There is therefore no other true logical division than this, that the concept sets itself on one side as the immediate, indeterminate universality. It is this very determinateness that makes its determinateness, very indeterminateness that makes its determinateness, or that it is a particular. So the difference here would be being at the very beginning of the logic and determinate being. If you remember the structure of that, this should make perfect sense. And that being is this indeterminate immediate. We then obviously go through the process, get to becoming. Actually, even becoming, you already see this. Then in becoming, you have the distinction between the logical distinction between coming to be and ceasing to be, which is there, and they're not the same, and yet we come to recognize they are the same. It's the same thing from different sides, and yet when you try to like make an absolute distinction, they keep falling into each other.
Yeah, if you have indeterminateness, then this is distinct from determinateness. And
which is itself a determinate relation.
Yes.
So yeah, the two are both a particular, the indeterminate and the determinate, and are therefore coordinated. And I mean, he highlights this. Another way to put it is co-instantiated, that they come in tandem.
Yeah, I like
both,
to say reciprocal, although I think Hegel doesn't always use that kind of language. For me, it feels very smooth to say reciprocal.
Yeah. Both as particular are also determinate against the universal, and in this sense they are subordinated to it. But even this universal, as against which the particular is determined, is for that reason itself also just one of the opposing sides. So there's the immediate indeterminate universality versus the determinate particular. The two are both a particular and are therefore coordinated. So the universal and particular come into distinction. This is the determinate distinction, but the determinateness of the concept is what particularity is. Therefore, the universal falls into the particular. So then we don't have the universal versus particular, but we have the particular with the particular. Both as particular are also determinate as against the universal, and in this sense they are subordinated to it. But even this universal, as against which the particular is determined, is for that reason itself also just one of the opposing sides. So even if we go in this way and say, and we try to make the distinction between, okay, well, we have the universal, we then distinguish it from the particular, but this makes the universal fall into the particular itself. And then we say, then it wasn't the real universal. These particulars are now distinguished from the real universal, which is the true, we might want to say the true universal, or the concrete universal. And Hegel says, well, then you've only repeated the process again. You haven't actually made a new logical move. All you've done is posit the universal once more, and you still have the universal as a particular against the particulars. When we speak of two opposing sides, we must repeat that the two constitute the particular, not just together as if they were alike in being particular only for external reflection, but because their determinateness over against each other is at the same time essentially one determinateness. And this is always important with Hegel. Since these are oppositions of the concept, these cannot be done upon comparative reflections. The particulars are not together because they share a quality called the particular in an external comparison. Rather, they are the particulars not in separate determinations, but in one determination. It is one determination which makes for particularity as such, which is always particulars. It's only one determinateness. If you think back to chapter 2, existence, this happens at the very beginning. The moment you have existence, existence must exist. Because the being, that which is that which is determinate. But the determinateness itself, because it is also itself determinate. And the moment you get any determination, it just cascades an entire set of other determinations by virtue of just being that distinction. And that distinction is always a distinction of two within that one distinction.
Yeah, so it's not like these things, have this stuff called particularity that's tying it all together. It's by virtue of there being existence, there is stuff that is particular, that is exclusive, right?
Yeah, because existence itself is the particularity. So the very difference of anything is already the particularity. It's the particularity which distinguishes the things as distinct things to begin with. So anytime you have something or other, these are not two determinateness, they're actually one. Anytime you have this or that, these aren't two determinateness, they're one determinateness. That it always has to appear as two things. And repeating again, if you have not read it, go and try to read chapter 1 and chapter 2. And if you need a guide, well, listen to my videos reading this, read my blog, or check out other people like Holgate, Winfield, White. Because that's where this stuff, I think, is most explicit, in a surprising way that gets you to reflect on this and see that it is the case. This isn't just something Hegel's just saying, this isn't just Hegel's opinion about what he would like or thinks happens from his subjective standpoint upon logical investigations. It is just what distinctions are.
So, I think I know what you mean, but when you talk about it's not Hegel's subjective standpoint, can you elaborate on what that means, please? Because I feel like people get confused a lot there.
That this is just a structure of concepts. This is a structure, and it's a structural dynamic in one go of concepts. This thing he's talking about here is specific to it. That if you have the universal, and you make a distinction, okay, the universal as opposed to the particular, whether you recognize it or not, you have brought the universal down to the particular as just a matter of the fact of what you have done in thinking about it. And so
I have an idea of like maybe how to recapitulate that. I know I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you mean though. So Gina, tell me if this makes sense to you, right? So like people can understand concepts in their subjective experience, but when they think a concept, right, there's like an actual like structure there, whether they're aware of it or not. Like somebody could just think all sorts of concepts and just not be aware of them whatsoever, but the structure of what their mind is interacting with, that conceptual structure, that's still a thing that's going on regardless of if the person is aware of it or not. Does that make sense?
Somewhat getting it, but all right, so can you elaborate more on like the sort of structure you're talking about exactly? Can you make it a little bit more particular?
We're just talking right now, I think, about the structure of concepts. So like you can think stuff and the stuff can have a conceptual structure and you can just not be aware of that, but like the conceptual structure is still there. Like it's still it's still being interacted with. It's just not something that's being recognized, or it may be recognized, but but my point is like it could be recognized or unrecognized. It doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, maybe a concrete example would be that, for example, the universal of dogs, which you could say it's the definition of dogs, or whatever, and existent dogs. Maybe a dog that you own or a dog you've seen, whatever. In understanding that the universal of the dog is the universal, it's a definition, in that you also have an immediate understanding that this is a universal which applies to, or in which falls certain, well, it's impossible to not say it, particulars fall into that universal. The universal is that which contains them. But they're making a distinction between that universal as a universal and those particulars as particulars that fall into that universal. Chair is just chair, like it's a thing you sit on, has legs, may have a backrest, whatever. And any particular chair may be, multiple legs, different colors, different fabrics, different styles. But you have the distinction already. So the universal is just a particular amongst its own particulars, which it subsumes. It's not a really totalizing, overarching thing which contains both itself, its particulars, the relationship of itself and its particulars, and the ways in which from the particulars this unity comes about of its own account, and from the unity the particulars come as their own account as well. So that distinction of the universal as universal and the particular as particular is itself an instance of particularity, because the universal is literally only a part of the full account.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so So that's the point that's going on here, that anytime you go from the universal and you posit it as distinct from its particulars, you have brought the universal down from the absolutely universal standpoint, in which it should be the thing that which contains all explanation, to a particular standpoint in which it's only one part of the explanation. So it itself is only particular.
So it's the universal from that particular standpoint then, in that instance.
Yeah.
Simplest way to think it is, if you have the universal dog and you have other particular dogs, there's a distinction between those particular, like the particular dogs and the universal dog. And so because they're distinct, the universal dog is particular. It is a universal dog. Just as these are a particular dog, another particular dog.
Yeah. So let's continue. Difference as it presents itself here is in its concept and therefore in its truth. All previous difference has this unity in the concept, as it is present immediately in being. Difference is the limit of an other. As present in reflection, it is relative, posited as referring essentially to its other. Here is where the unity of the concept thus begins to be posited. At first, however, the unity is only a reflective shine in an other. The true significance of the transitoriness and the dissolution of these determinations is just this, that they attain to their concept, to their truth. Being, existence, something, or whole and part, and so on, substance and accidents, cause and effect are thought determinations on their own. As determinate concepts, however, they are grasped insofar as each is cognized in unity with its others or in opposition to them. So this thing says the true significance of the transitoriness and the dissolution of these determinations is just this, that they attain to their concept, to their truth. What are the determinations he's talking about is all concepts that have gone on by before this point in the logic. They have all been determinations that have dissolved or been gone beyond. They have become something else in the investigation. And the meaning of this whole transitions and dissolutions, becomings of all these concepts all the way here is that they attain to the concept, to their truth. That every single move forward, or rather every single move, insofar as it is a move forward, has been a move forward toward the truth. Because they have led all the way from the indeterminate beginning to this standpoint of the determinate concept. Cause and effect, being, existence, something, or whole and part, and so on, substance and accidents, cause and effects are thought determinations on their own. Always important. Thought determinations. The logic is not about things, but about thought determinations. Never mind what thought is, insofar as, well, at least here at the level of the concept, we do finally have the definition of thought. In itself, in and for itself in this case. As determinate concepts, however, they are grasped insofar as each is cognized in unity with its others or in opposition to them. So, there's these concepts as such, you may be thinking about causality as such, and that may be just in its indeterminate form. But when you actually think about it as determinate concepts, you think causality not merely unrelated to anything else, but specifically related to other things, to other concepts, as well as to the things to which we are applying and subsuming. Whole and parts, for example, or cause and effect, and so on, are not yet diverse terms that are determined as particular relatively to each other. For although they implicitly constitute one concept, their unity has not yet attained the form of universality. Thus, the difference as well, which is in these relations, does not yet have the form of being one determinateness. Cause and effect, for example, are not two diverse concepts, but only one determinate concept, and causality is, like every concept, a simple concept. So this is something weird for people to grapple with. That we think that a concept is just that which we can just give a definition to. So we say, the concept of cause is that which causes an effect, and the concept of effect is that which is determined by a cause. And we say those are two concepts, and Hegel says, no, these are one determinate concept. And emphasis on determinate. Because that's what causes, the determinacy of the concept is why it must appear as two, minimally two, cause and effect. If cause was in an indeterminate concept, it would not have, it would just be being. It would have no relations. It would have no determinacy.
Yeah, like what would it make sense to talk about cause without talking about effect? Just what would it make sense to talk about effect without talking about cause? That, it's nonsense otherwise.
And when Hegel says simple concept, simplicity is not what most people think it is. It is and it isn't. It's simple in that it is one. But because it is one, it is also a plurality. It is many, and therefore the absolutely simple is also the maximally complex.
Yeah, that does make sense because, the simpler you get, it does seem like the more complicated the way you interpret what's simple then can become, right? Like, Gina, you remember we were talking about Antonio's video on immanent critique,
Right.
and it's pretty simple, right? But then think about how many, think about the sheer scope of, the sheer complexity of like what that could be applied to, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's one sense of it. That's one sense of the complexity. But here, the complexity is that the simple concept is going to be the concept, because it's only one. But the concept is, we're at this point at what? 500 pages into the science of logic. The simple concept has 500 pages of background to it. Yeah. So that's the complexity I'm talking about.
That's fascinating.
So continuing. With respect to completeness, we have just seen that the determinate moment of particularity is complete in the difference of the universal and the particular, and that only these two make up the particular species. Okay, so this is what I thought this originally has to mean, and I think we came to a consensus on that, Rain. I don't know why he brought up the whole thing about contingency of the completeness, except as a warning for thinking about it quantitatively rather than qualitatively through the concept. Still not sure about that paragraph. But this makes sense.
Either, especially given, because it almost sounded like he was saying self-determining earlier when he was talking about that. But usually the way contingency is used in Hegel usually means externally determined. That was a tricky part where he brought in the contingency, how it's contingently complete.
So particularity is complete in the difference of the universal and the particular, because that is the full particularity as particular, and that only these two make up the particular species. So insofar as the concept is concerned, we have determined the totality of the particular species. So we have a complete account of the diversity. But let's see. So going back to this. This totality, inasmuch as the determinateness of the particular is taken as mere diversity, appears as completeness. In this respect, the species are complete simply insofar as there are no more of them. There is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just a dispersed difference, for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, there is no inner standard or principle available for them, for their diversity is just a dispersed difference, for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, is a merely external reflex and an unconstrained contingent completeness. Yeah, that's such a weird sentence.
Yeah, this is really tricky. Okay, there is no inner standard or principle available for them. So that means that for their diversity is just dispersed difference, for which the universality, which is for itself absolute unity, it's merely an external reflex. So this is in them being differentiated from the universal or universality. And so universality is a external reflex, an unconstrained contingent completeness.
So again, this makes me think of the finite and infinite, in which this is a point in which the finite and infinite are still not in the true infinite, but are in the finite infinite relation, where the finite as finite sets itself against the infinite. And so the particulars disperse as a diversity, but their unity is posited as external to them.
Right.
It's a merely external reflex and an unconstrained contingent completeness.
Yeah, in as much as they're all contained within that simple universality. There are no more outside of them, otherwise it wouldn't be a universality. It's just a formal completeness. Like, okay, this is all of them. There are no more. Therefore, it's simply complete.
Okay, it's tricky because there's several senses at play here, and it seems to me with this little section that we keep going over, he wants us to be considering certain things in their moments of independence.
Yeah.
But it seems to also anticipate reunions that occur, because when I read over this, I keep just switching perspectives on it from different points.
We may be
it's only 2
we may
points
be
of
over.
view.
Yeah, we may be overthinking it probably, because it may really be just this thing about the finite, that in the immediacy of particularity, it's just that infinite diversity.
Yeah.
Which
is complete
because
being diverse is them being complete. So there's no external standard. There's not a universal to which they are compared, such that they are reified as complete. It's that by being particular directly, and all of them just being particular directly, they are complete.
Yeah, because it's taking all of them together, with nothing else being considered. So it's like a simple completeness.
Yeah.
But it says it appears as completeness, because, well, you don't see anymore, so that's all there is. So it appears complete.
So you don't, you wouldn't know that. And that's why I think that's why he mentioned that it's contingent, and that
right.
The universal has fallen to particularity, but it's not being it's still not recognized. So the particular as particular is only just this diversity, which is only complete contingently insofar as there are no more. From that perspective, whether there are or not is a contingent thing. Yeah.
But it's unconstrained, so it's not saying there can be no more. It's just saying there are no more, right?
Approaching it externally and supplying a standard for it to check itself with.
Yes, yeah. So as diverse,
it is unconstrained means that they each provide an inner standard of just being particular. So even though he says there is no inner standard or shared principle, that means like that's referring to the universal. There's no
Yeah.
universal inner standard or universal principle. Their principle is just their particularity itself. And so that's where it gets its completeness and its lack of constraint, because there is no limit or nothing to check itself against.
Right.
So
Or check themselves against each other, because their diversity is just dispersed difference.
Yeah,
like
these
they're
are
different
Leibniz-
ones. They're each a particular.
Sorry.
Go on.
These are like Leibniz's monads, like these particulars where they're unextended and they have no connection to any others, insofar as they're just particular. They're like each a universe unto themselves.
Yeah, because he says right here, but diversity passes over into opposition into an immanent connection of diverse moments. So at this point of particularity, they're particulars but unconnected as particulars, apparently. The particular, however, because it is universal, is this immanent connection.
Yeah,
So
so
these-
this would be a development from the previous moment that we just went over, where that's only insofar as they're being considered purely exclusively from one another. But when we hit this, but diversity passes over into opposition, it's noting that that exclusivity is itself intrinsic to each particular. And so they form a connection because they have to mutually exclude each other. But that exclusion itself, qua exclusion, is the inclusion, or the universal
Yeah.
returned.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah, I'm satisfied with that interpretation. That seems to be what that was getting at. All right, continuing 536. With respect to completeness, we have just seen that the determinate moment of particularity is complete in the difference of the universal and the particular, and that only these two make out the particular species. To be sure, there are more than two species to be found in any genus in nature, and these many species cannot stand in the same relation to each other, as we have shown. This is the importance of nature, that it cannot abide by and exhibit the rigor of the concept, and loses itself in blind manifoldness, void of concept.
The impotence of nature, not importance.
Oh, impotence, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the impotence of nature. Yes, he repeats this phrase quite a few places across his works. This is the impotence of nature, that it cannot abide by and exhibit the rigor of the concept, and loses itself in blind manifoldness, void of concept. This is one of those moments in which the famous phrase popularized by Zizek that if the facts do not conform to the theory, so much worse for the facts. Hegel says, like if you point out that, well, how can there be universals that determine everything when look at this, even with a human genome, for example, or this is a hot button topic. Sex. There's a constant and endless debate about how we genetically, biologically define sex, because there's a bunch of people who just, for right reasons, it's rational, by the way, to question this, if you do not have any standard, objectively, for why we would limit certain things. Like, it's not just X, Y, and XX. They are functional human beings that have XXX. I think there's like some kind of like XXY. And though it is, yes, a minority of the population, it's still biologically functional. So how could we define sex by, this exclusivity of the X and Y? Now, I'm not saying that Hegelianism allows you to define sexual genetics in any way like this, because I think as far as that's just whatever works. But for other things in which we can give some kind of conceptual justification for a unification of that concept, pointing out to failures in existence for that concept to attain is not an argument against the truth of that concept and the way things function anyways. Actually, Kant brings something up somewhere in his second critique. I've seen the quote, but I haven't seen exactly where it's from, in which he complains about how people try to point out that there can be no concept of the good, because look at all these different the different goods that people conceive of in empirical existence. One guy thinks this is good, another guy thinks that is good, a woman thinks this is good, a man thinks this is good, person for the third gender or whatever. God, there's so many third genders across the world, and that's that's not a. There's different names. What is it? Oh God, I don't know any names. I know just like it's those genders that don't fall into the binary of man or woman in the way that we think of in the West.
Like the Hydra in India.
Yeah, Mahu.
Yeah, those.
Yeah, DNA.
I do always have the question, like granted the impotence and blind manifoldness of nature, how to understand a philosophy of nature, a Hegelian philosophy of nature, like
Highly contingent, just like nature is. I don't think it's absolutely contingent, but I think it's highly contingent. And I think that's all Hegel expects us to get out of it. Anyways, back to my Kant thing. Kant points out this whole thing about that the empirical differences that people have about these things and the failure of existent things to live up to the concepts that we have does not prove the concepts false. It does not prove that existence is therefore a free-for-all of all norms are equal. So, even if, for example, or at least on Kant's view, even if you cannot live up to, say, the example of being a good person to the level that Jesus was or Buddha was, this is not an argument against that being the norm towards which we ought to aspire to and that we should comport ourselves to. Yeah, which is a different question, of course, than whether gravity should be conceived in this or that way. But anyways, continuing. We can wonder at nature, at the manifoldness of its genera and species, in the infinite diversity of its shapes, for wonder is without concept, and its object is the irrational. Ooh, that's a swing at Aristotle right there. Because Aristotle says, well, it might not be that much of a swing. Because Aristotle says, philosophy begins with wonder. And in a way, obviously, it must. But wonder is not the essence of philosophy.
Right.
So, it begins with irrational. It's not yet. And quite literally, irrational versus rational. Rational in the sense of ratio. Ratio in the sense of, think about it. Rations, fractions. That which is rational is that which is parted. And only that which is parted could be that which is universal. So if wonder begins with the irrational, that which is immediate is unthought yet. Well, of course, it wouldn't be a concept yet. It is allowed to nature, since nature is the self-externality concept, to indulge in this diversity, just as spirit, even though it possesses a concept in the shape of concept, lets itself go into pictorial representation and runs wild in the infinite manifoldness of the latter. And that he's talking about. I'm pretty sure this is a reference to religion as picture thinking. In which case, you can have all kinds of images of God and gods and the nature of reality and all these other things. And there's no end to it. It is the manifold genera and species of nature must not be esteemed to be anything more than arbitrary notions of spirit engaged in pictorial representations. Both indeed show traces and intimations of the concept, but they do not exhibit in it. They do not exhibit it in trustworthy form, trustworthy copy, for they are the sides of its free self-externality. The concept is the absolute power precisely because it can let its difference go free in the shape of self-subsistent diversity, external necessity, accidentality, arbitrariness, opinion, all of which, however, must not be taken as anything more than the abstract side of nothingness. So a slight elaboration on freedom and the concept, their relationship, because the concept is freedom, by the way. So the concept is the absolute power precisely because it can let things go free. So rather than being this restraining, containing universal, the universal is the free existence of particulars, and the particulars themselves obviously will be individuals in relationship to each other. And because of their self, and they must be existence, they must be self-subsistent to the extent that they are existent. They are not absolutely self-subsistent. They must be diverse. There are external necessities, and this will become obvious as we go on into as the work goes on into objectivity after the concept. There is accidentality because of that objective relation. There is arbitrariness because of the contingent relations, which are external to this substance or the self-internality of any entity. And there's opinion because of the immediacy of perceptions that we have when we enter this realm, where we must develop our reason. So all of that adheres in the universal, because the universal is just that which is the very ground and happening of the existence and free development of existent individual things, particularly persons. But all these finite things and relations, all of which, however, must not be taken as anything more than the abstract side of nothingness. Here talking about the diversity, the external necessity, the accidentality, arbitrariness, opinion. All of these are in their immediacy and mere nothingness. And really, even from the standpoint of the end, in which they are recognized as moments of the whole process of truth, they are each only a moment of nothingness. They are a moment of that lack, that breaking of the unity in an unconscious and non-posited manner. Once that break is reintegrated, it's not a nothingness. It's a determinate negation at that point. It's got a positive relationship now. So it's not merely a diversity, it's not merely an external necessity, it's not merely an accident, it's not arbitrariness, and it's not merely an opinion. As we have just seen, the determinateness of the particular is simple as principle, but it is also simple as moment of the totality, determinateness as against the other determinateness. So I think that's determinateness of the particular is simple as principle. So the particular immediately as particular, which is the runaway diversity. But it is also simple as moment of the totality, insofar as the totality is the originative one from which they're being generated, the unity. Determinateness as against the other determinateness. The concept, in determining or differentiating itself, behaves negatively towards its unity and gives itself the form of one of its ideal moments of being. As a determinate concept, it has a determinate existence in general, but this being no longer has the significance of mere immediacy, but has the significance rather of an immediacy, which is equal to itself by virtue of absolute mediation, an immediacy that equally contains in itself the other moment of essence or of reflection. This universality with which the determinate clothes itself is abstract universality. The particular has this universality in it as its essence, but insofar as the determinateness of the difference is posited and thereby has being, the universality is form in it, in the determinate as such, is its content. Universality becomes form inasmuch as the difference is something essential, just as in the pure universal it is, on the contrary, only absolute negativity and not difference posited as such. DM says, I thought of an analogy to explain how simple concepts are complex. Imagine a prism stone. There's one simple stone, but within there are many momentary perspectives of reflected light, and the concept would just be the absolute universal of this. Yeah, that's one sense of seeing it. Although it's not really a good example, because the way that the prism relates to light is a mechanical relation. But if you understand it in the proper way, that the prism is like the universal, in which this would work if the prism itself was the source of its own light, that it would be the source of light as such, and that light, in being light, would also then differentiate itself into its moments of darkness, which are the colors, because colors are determinate light in this case. Light would be the universal. The colors would be the particular.
Yeah, I wonder if there is something, though, to better analogize it to, just because of the fact that I know color, or rather light, is external. And, because light is external, and we're talking about internal differences in perspective, then it does sort of, impose an impetus to seek something different, right? Like, to try to see, all right, well, what analogy could maybe better fit here? But I'm trying to think of an analogy that both relates to people in their everyday experience, but also is just correct, right?
I don't know. I think the analogy of dogs worked. People know dogs in their everyday experience, unless they're afraid of dogs.
Then they really know dog.
Because yeah, it would just be that in one simple determination, which always obviously it always will be determinate, no matter what. You cannot have you cannot really have the universal and abstract. So even with the most basic of life, it is a determinate form. Like, it doesn't have no distinctions. It has to have distinctions, otherwise it just doesn't exist. So the basic determination of a sperm and an egg cell come together, and from that you get the entire generation of the articulation of the body in its manifold form. One becomes many. The universal becomes particulars, and the particulars are not just particulars. It's not just a mass of cells from that one cell. It's specific cells in relation to each other. They're individual cells, individual organs, individual limbs, and then this individual comes out into the world, gets birth. It's a puppy amongst maybe a lone puppy, maybe amongst a litter, but it's not the only puppy that's coming into the world. There's many puppies coming out of the world from other individuals that are procreating and having puppies, and then they grow up and they have their own specific. They have a general life in which the animal has to be taken care of by the parent relation. There's the nurturing, socializing relation. There is a teaching relation, learning relation, and then they grow up to adulthood. The dog has, the developed qualities of dogginess. They bark, they have fun, whatever. They like to play ball. And then they have also the impetus of the natural drives, in which they reach a certain point of maturity. Certain things start developing naturally, kick in. Sexual desires. They procreate. And the next generation of dogs comes in. The dog generates dogs, generates dogs, generates dogs, in one giant species circle, in which the origin of dogs is dogs. Completely. There's nothing outside the dogs, ontologically speaking, which is going to be making dogs. So the dog comes fully from itself. And there is one, yeah. So there is one dog universal. All dogs share that. But it exists in the plurality of dogs.
So
Somebody's gonna bring up the wolves and be like, no, they're not self-generating.
So I have a question. How would we consider, if someone says, okay, well, yeah, but like eventually, a dog may evolve into something that may lose the qualities that we consider dogginess, right? How would we deal with that?
Externalities of nature.
Yeah, externalities of nature. That's a further determination that has to be accounted for, but isn't here yet. So you can have these qualities of dogginess. So far.
So, so the dogs, for now, if the conditions remain the same, will always be the same kind of dogs we have now. Excluding the possibility of radiation causing mutations, of excluding the conditions of environments forcing certain adaptive traits.
That's all external is the point then.
Yeah.
So far we know they have upturned tails and so on.
Yep. So anyways, let me read that paragraph. As we have just seen, the determinateness of the particular is simple as principle, but it is also simple as moments as a totality, determinateness as against the other determinants. The concept in determining or differentiating itself behaves negatively towards its unity and gives itself the form of one of its ideal moments of being. So the concept in determining or differentiating itself behaves negatively towards its unity, so it begins as the universal, but insofar as the universal is, it is a determinate being. Therefore, it becomes a universal. And it gives itself the form of one of its moments, one of its ideal moments of being. Ideal here, the ideal is always apart in Hegel. So when something is idealized or is ideal, the context, there is two senses that may come out of that, but the main sense, and it's always, you can always tell by context, is partedness. That which is ideal is part of something else, subsumed under something else. So the universal behaves negatively towards its unity by being what it is, gives itself a form of one of its ideal moments. It falls into particularity because its moment, the moment of the universal is the particular. And then it is a determinate concept. It is a concept, not the concept. It has a determinate existence in general. So determinate existence is also qualitative existence. But this being no longer has the significance of mere immediacy, but has the significance rather of an immediacy which is equal to itself by virtue of absolute mediation, an immediacy that it equally contains in itself the other moment of essence or of reflection. But this being no longer has the significance of mere immediacy. It has a determinate existence in general. But this being no longer has the significance of mere immediacy. So neither of the particulars have a mere immediacy. They have an immediacy which is equal to itself by virtue of absolute mediation. So the particular against other particulars. Absolute mediation being always self-mediation. An immediacy that equally contains in itself the other moment of essence or reflection. So here, because an immediacy that equally contains in itself the other moment of essence or reflection. So since this is the universal, in which the particular is not something opposed to the universal absolutely, but it's only momentarily opposed, because it itself is only the determinate universal. It has its essence within it. Yes, we already got that over it. This universality with which the determinate clothes itself is abstract universality. Okay, we get that. Insofar as there is a distinction between the determinate concept and the universal concept of which it is an instance of, That distinction makes the universal the abstract universal. The particular has this universality in it as its essence, right? Insofar as the universal is not merely the abstract, but still the concrete, that totality which concludes itself and its other. But insofar as the determinateness of the difference is posited and thereby has being, the universality is form in it, and the determinateness as such is its content. So the particular has this universality in it as its essence. And the essence, it is the essence because it's the unifying whole. So insofar as the particulars are particulars, they are particulars of the universal. Therefore, that's why the universal is the essence of the particulars. It's the unifying whole underlying them. But insofar as the determinateness of the difference is posited, and thereby has being, the universality is form in it, and the determinateness as such is its content. Okay, so that's putting in the forms of content and form, if you want to. If you like that particular framing. That seems pretty straightforward to me. Universality becomes form in as much as the difference is something essential, just as in the pure universal it is, on the contrary, only absolute negativity and not difference posited as such. So universality becomes form in as much as the difference is something essential. So the difference is the identity or the unifying form. So here what I'm thinking of is that what makes the universality particular is that what they share is the particularity in being particular. So that's how the difference is something essential. So the particularity is essential to particular. Just as in the pure universal it is, on the contrary, only absolute negativity and not the difference posited as such. Since we're not dealing with stuff from the essence, that distinction is probably not that important to grasp on right now. Now, the determinateness is indeed an abstraction as against the other determinateness, but the other determinateness is only universality itself, and this too is therefore abstract universality, and the determinateness of the concept or particularity is again nothing more than determinate universality. So abstraction is also the same thing as idea. Well, it's not the same thing, it's a different kind of emphasis, but the same structure as ideology, as particularity, in which an abstraction is that which is taken apart from its whole. So determinateness causes things to break apart from each other as against the other determinateness. But the other determinateness is only universality itself, so it's the particular versus the universal. And this too is therefore abstract universality. So there you go, the explanation of why. Why is it called abstract universality? Because it is opposed. It is apart from the particular. And the determinateness of the concept or particularity is again nothing more than determinate universality. And since the universal and the particular are both in a determinate, the particular is the determinate universal. The universal, in being opposed to the determinate universal as indeterminate, itself is determinate as indeterminate, and therefore itself is only determinate universality once again. So, which is particularity. So that's how the whole dynamic moves from universal, posits the particular is different from the universal, and instead of having the particular versus the universal as such, that very opposition is particularity as such in truth. So to reiterate, particularity is not that which is subsumed under the universal, or which is the plurality distinct from the unifying universality. Particularity is the very distinction of universality in particularity. as such. It's that determinateness which is the true determinateness of universal concepts. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
In this universality, the concept is outside itself, and because it is the concept, which is there outside itself, the abstract universal contains all the moments of the concept. It is alpha, universality, beta, determinateness, gamma, the simple unity of the two. But this unity is immediate, and the particularity is not therefore as totality. Implicitly, it is this totality also, and mediation. It is essentially a reference to the other excluding it, or the sublation of negation, namely of the other determinateness, an other that lingers on only as an intention, for it vanishes immediately, revealing itself to be the same as its other is supposed to be. Therefore, what makes this universality an abstraction is that the mediation is only a condition, or is not posited in it. Because it is not posited, the unity of the abstraction has the form of immediacy, and the content has the form of indifference to its universality, for the content is nothing but this totality, which is the universality of absolute negativity. Hence, the abstract universal is indeed the concept, but the unconceptualized concept, the concept not posited as such. Ooh. Okay, so in this universality, the concept is outside itself, and because it is the concept, which is there outside itself, the abstract universal contains all the moments of the concept. It is alpha, universality, beta, determinateness, gamma, the simple unity of the two. But this unity is immediate, and the particularity is not therefore as totality. Okay, this I am not quite sure of. Okay, so determinate universality. In this universality, the concept is outside itself, and because it is the concept, which is there outside itself, the abstract universal contains all the moments of the concept. It is alpha, universality, beta, determinateness, gamma, the simple unity too. But this unity is immediate, and the particularity is not therefore as totality. Okay. Makes sense. Since this is about the particular as such. Even in its concreteness as particular, it's not the totality as such. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the particular, now would it? Its particularity is specifically that distinction of itself and the universal, as well as itself and other particulars. Implicitly, it is this totality also, and mediation. It is essentially a reference to the other excluding it, or the reference to the it being the particular is essentially a reference to the other, which is the universal, the abstract universal excluding it, or the sublation of negation, namely of the other determinateness. The sublation of negation here being that the particular is also explicitly the other to its other. An other that lingers on only as an intention, for it vanishes immediately, revealing itself to be the same as its other is supposed to be. So, insofar as the universal distinguishes itself from the particular, the universal falls into the particular. But insofar as the particular distinguishes itself from the universal, what it distinguishes itself from is really just itself, which is the particular. So the particular distinguished from the particular is, at least in the immediate sense, that which brings you right back to the universal, the abstract universal. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Therefore, what makes this universality an abstraction is that the mediation is only a condition, or is not posited in it. Because it is not posited, the unity of abstraction has the form of immediacy, and the content has the form of indifference to its universality. For the content is nothing but its totality, which is the universality of absolute negativity. So it's a condition, and condition is something external, just like otherness is. So it's failing to be the concept. It is the concept, but it's failing to be the concept insofar as it says it's not posited in it. Because this distinction in its unity is not being put forth by the totality as such. It's happening, but it's not being put forth imminently by these concepts. We're drawing it out of them, but in each moment, this is not put forth explicitly. For the content here being the particular, is nothing but this totality, which is the universality of absolute negativity. Universality of absolute negativity is just the totality of the concept as such, the true concrete universal, or what the universal immediately was supposed to be, because it was the absolute negativity of all of essence as well. Hence, the abstract universal is indeed the concept, but the unconceptualized concept, the concept not posited as such. So, right, if you just, somebody points out something to you and says, like, what is that? And you say, suppose it's a rose. And you say, it is the rose. It is a rose. In that you've given a name, it's an immediate universality. It's an abstract concept. But it's unconceptualized. You said nothing. Except but you say, well, it is what it is. You have not given specifications as to what it is. And people do not understand this. They do not understand that explanation has to be given conceptually. Explanations are not sensuous things. People think that they know things because they're familiar with their sensuous specifications. But they don't know things because they don't know what actually their internal relationships to themselves are. If somebody asks, like, do you know what a rose is? You're like, oh yeah, I know what a rose is. It's this, it's red, its petals look a certain way, it's got thorns, blah blah blah. And you can show them a picture or you can draw it, whatever. That doesn't show what a rose is in reality. It just shows an appearance, an immediate appearance, really, of a rose. But to know what a rose is, you'd have to be somebody, who's an actual gardener who specializes in roses. Those people know what a rose is. They'll tell you the conditions of its growth. They'll tell you the ways in which a species propagate, the ways in which you have to take care of them specifically, the things that they specifically do, the ways they germinate, how touchy they are about certain conditions, and so on and so on. Those people know what a rose is, but we average everyday people, we just know what a rose looks like. We don't actually know what it is. We have unconceptualized concepts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking in my head because on top of that, hypothetically speaking, what if it's just a flower that looks like a rose but phylogenetically is completely different, really, and it just evolved to look like a rose through convergent evolution or something like that.
Indeed, that would be a mistake of appearance, because in order for you to know what that thing is, you'd have to make sure that all the determinations actually align. So, something may look like a rose, smell like a rose, and all the other things, and then you try to breed it with a rose and it won't happen, and it won't do it. And that's when you know that it's actually not. So I think we got that down.
By the way, that was pretty good. I thought that was a pretty good thing to bring up, Gina.
Yeah.
When we speak of the determinate concept, what we ordinarily mean is precisely just this abstract universal. Even by concept as such, what is generally understood is only this unconceptualized concept, and the understanding is designated as its faculty. Demonstration belongs to this understanding inasmuch as it proceeds by way of concepts, that is to say, only in determinations. This progression by way of concepts does not therefore reach past finitude and necessity. The highest it reaches is the negative infinite, the abstraction of the highest essence, which is itself the determinateness of the indeterminateness. Absolute substance too, although not this empty abstraction, but on the contrary, a totality according to content, is still abstract, for since it is without absolute form, its innermost truth is not constituted by the concept. Although it is the identity of universality and particularity, or of thought and externality, this identity is not the determinateness of the concept. There is rather an understanding outside it, an understanding which is contingent precisely because it is outside it, in which and for which the substance exists in diverse attributes and modes. So, right, when we speak of the determinate concept, what we ordinarily mean is precisely just this abstract universal. We just that container which is not identical with that which it contains. So that's usually indeed what we do mean by saying, like, oh, what's the concept of this thing? We don't identify the concept in the thing. Even by concept as such, what is generally understood is only unconceptualized concept, and the understanding is designated as its faculty. Unconceptualized mainly because what we generally understand by it is we generally confuse concepts with names, or what is more specifically signifiers. Hello? Testing.
You're cutting out.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yes.
Okay. Where was I? Unconceptualized concepts. That I think we generally confuse concepts with names, or rather specifically signifiers, in which that we think that when we have the concept of a thing, when we have its reference as an empirical object, which causes a lot of confusion, because this does not give you any determination of what a concept properly is. Because you can take any arbitrary set of empirical objects and qualities and give that some arbitrary signifier and call it a concept, and plenty of people, by the way, do. That's a huge problem in the sciences as to what do we determine that's actually to be bound in a meaningful concept that is operatively useful to us. That's the problem of IQ, in which in AI, people are bumbling about, like, what is intelligence? And like, well, if I define intelligence this way, then my computer is intelligent in this way. But if I define intelligence this other way, then my computer isn't intelligent. But I don't like your definition of intelligence. I don't think that holds true to what I think intelligence and what I think other people think intelligence is. So these are all just arbitrary conceptions, which aren't really conceptions at all, because they're just taking qualities and bundles of qualities and arbitrarily putting them together under some signifier and calling that a concept. It's an unconceptualized concept. Skipping this progression by way of concept does not therefore reach past finitude and necessity. The highest it reaches is the negative infinite, the abstraction of the highest essence, which is itself determinateness of the indeterminateness. So that seems to be like describing the analytic process of concept determinations, in which you try to break things down to the most simple. And that's also a process of abstraction of determinateness. So you go from empirical particulars to like, okay, what are the things that unify these? What is equal in all of them? And then you go to what is more and more universally equal, or which contains the categories of all these other things. And what you get at the end is either being or nothing, which are both the highest essence, which is itself the determinateness of the indeterminateness. Absolute substance, here he's referring to Spinoza. And for Spinoza, substance is the totality of attributes. God is substance. God is that which contains the infinity of attributes. Not this empty abstraction, but on the contrary, totality according to content is still abstract, for since it is without absolute form, its innermost truth is not constituted by the concept. So the substance in its plurality of attributes is still only a determinate relationship, which doesn't specify why the relationship holds, how the relationship is generated, and how that's really immanent to one single concept. So it's it's still an external bundling of qualities by definition. Moreover, abstraction is not as empty as it is usually said to be. It is the determinate concept. It has some determinateness or other for its content. The highest essence also, the pure abstraction, has the determinateness of indeterminateness, as just mentioned, but indeterminateness is a determinateness because it is supposed to stand opposite the determinateness. So here's Hegel defending abstraction. We all hate on abstraction, but abstraction is actually something necessary and to that extent good. But the moment one says what it is intended, its intended meaning sublates itself by itself, for it is spoken of on par with determinateness, and from this abstraction the concept and its truth are brought out. To be sure, any determinate concept is empty insofar as it does not contain the totality, but only a one-sided determinateness. Even when it has otherwise concrete content, such as, for instance, humankind, the state animal, etc., it remains an empty concept inasmuch as its determinateness is not the principle of its differentiation. The principle contains the beginning and the essence of its development and realization. Any other determinateness of the concept is, however, odious. To reproach the concept as such for being empty is to ignore its absolute determinateness, which is the difference of the concept and the only true content of the element of the concept. So abstraction, even absolute abstraction, is not actually empty. It specifies, it gives the determinateness of indeterminacy. Indeterminacy is determinateness because it's supposed to stand opposite determinate, but the moment one says what it is, its intended meaning sublates itself by itself. For it is spoken of on par with determinateness, and from this abstraction the concept and its truth are brought out. So insofar as the indeterminate is, the moment one says what it is, that the indeterminateness is that which lacks determinateness, its intended meaning sublates itself by itself. So sublation here has cancels. It cancels itself by itself. For it is spoken of on par with determinateness, and from this abstraction the concept and its truth are brought out. So the truth of indeterminateness is its determinateness. And the moment you specify what indeterminateness is, you have shown that it is determinate. And therefore the indeterminate cancels itself out and swings to the other side, to the truth of what it is, which is its determinateness. And he says, any determinate concept is empty insofar as it does not contain the totality, but only a one-sided determinateness. So even when it has otherwise concrete content, such as, for instance, humankind, the state animal, etc., it remains an empty concept inasmuch as its determinateness is not the principle of its differentiation. So if you just give this is the problem with definitions. If you just give a definition, you're given only a one-sided determinateness. But one-sidedness is abstractness. It's that which is taken apart from its actual essential whole. And when you take that abstractness truly as abstract, it must be empty because it's been taken away and outside of its determinateness. Therefore, by consequence, it will be indeterminate, and it won't tell you anything. So if you take this, for example, the definition of the human being or humankind away from history, historical development, cultural development, from socio-psychological development within, say, a given community or family, which also is further abstracting from culture, and you define a human being as this abstract aggregate of desires and cognitive abilities, you've given something really empty. You're giving something that can barely be recognized as a human being. But if you give humankind or human being in general as a real concept, as a generative principle, which contains the totality of itself, you're going to be given an account of the entirety of human biological being, as far as psychology and neurology and all those things go. You're going to be given an account of human physical developmental being, which also will correspond and coincide with psychological as well as cultural development, which will also coincide with social relations and developments, which will also coincide with historical developments. So you can see in that way how there's a difference between definitional concepts, which by necessity have to be abstract, and the concept which Hegel's talking about, which is a completely different kind of thing. And this is very difficult to communicate to people because it is very alien to the way in which most people think nowadays. This was something that came up last week in a discussion in another server, where someone just could not accept, because they could not conceive of a concept which is not definitional, which is not given at the outset, and is instead a generative self-development of content form. So continuing, here we have the circumstance that explains why the understanding is nowadays held in such a low repute and is so much discredited when measured against reason. It is the fixity which it imparts to determinacies and consequently to anything finite. This fixity consists in the form of the abstract universality just considered that makes them unalterable. For qualitative determinateness and also the determination of reflection are essentially limited, and because of their limitation they entail a reference to their other, hence the necessity of the transition and passing away. But the universality which they possess in the understanding gives them this form of immanent reflection, and because this form removes from them the reference to the other, they have become unalterable. Now, although this eternity belongs to the pure concept by nature, the determinations of the concept are eternal essentialities only according to form, but their content is not a proportion to this form, and therefore they are not truth or imperishable. Their content is not proportionate to their form because it is not the determinate itself as universal, that is not as totality of the difference of the concept, or is not itself the whole form. The form of the limited understanding is for this reason itself imperfect universality, that is to say, abstract universality. But further, we must pay due respect to the infinite force of the understanding in splitting the concrete into abstract determinacies and plumbing the depth of the difference. This force, which alone is at the same time the mighty power causing transition of the determinacies. So, for those of you who don't know, the distinction between the understanding of reason is that the understanding is that mode of reasoning which takes place in the analyzing and distinguishing of concepts. And in doing so, the understanding specifies concepts in their distinction, and manages also to think them in their distinction, and ends up being the one that can bring about the revelation of the dialectical nature of concepts, the contradictory aspect of them. The concrete of intuition is a totality, but a sensuous totality, a real material that subsists in space and time, part outside part, each indifferent to the other. Surely this lack of unity in a manifold that makes it the content of intuition ought not to be credited as privileging it over the universal of the understanding. The mutability of that manifold exhibits in intuition already points the mutability that the manifold exhibits in intuition already points to the universal. But all the manifold that comes to intuition is just more of the same, an equally alterable other, not the universal that one would expect to appear and take its place. But least of all should we reckon to the credit of such sciences as, for example, geometry and arithmetic, that their material carries an intuitive element with it, or imagine that their propositions are grounded by it. On the contrary, the presence of that element renders the material of these sciences of an inferior nature. The intuition of figures or numbers is of no help to the science of figures and numbers. Only the thought of them produces this science. In concept, no. In practice, I think we have seen that is actually not the case. One finds that pure mathematics is nowadays actually very wedded to intuitional representations, because there are things that appear much faster and more clearly and are far easier to see in a geometric representation than it is by looking at sheer numbers and their relationships. So there's huge domains of mathematics which are essentially pure mathematics, but which have a huge fulcrum of geometrical representation as essential to the way in which they go about figuring out their problems. But if by intuition we understand not merely a sensuous material but the objective totality, then the intuition is an intellectual one. That is, its subject matter is not existence in its externalization, but that element in existence which is the unalterable reality in truth, the reality only insofar as it is essentially the concept and is determined by it. That's very interesting. At the very beginning of the logic, he says, being there's nothing to there. Being has no content, and he says there's nothing to be intuited in it, if we may speak of intuiting at all. And he also mentions the transition from being to nothing in the remarks, that we intuit or intend a distinction by the concept of being, even though we cannot state it. It's there, it happens. This also makes sense of, this is also intuition in the sense of intellectual intuitions, in which there is in a much broader sense of experience than the empiricists use it, and then Kant uses it. There is an intuition of thought. Kant makes a difference between intuitions and thinking concepts and whatever. But here Hegel says, no, we don't really have to make that strong distinction, because it would also make sense. Of course, depending on how we conceive the concept. So, insofar as by intuition we understand not merely a sensuous material, but the objective totality, then it makes sense to talk about intellectual intuitions. The idea of whose more precise nature will more be said later. What intuition as such is supposed to have over the concept is external reality, the reality that lacks the concept and receives value only through the concept. So again, one of those scenarios in which people might read that and go, oh my god, Hegel says that the ideal world is more real than the real world as we normally understand it. Don't be too worried about that. This is basically just this links strongly to the position that the empirical world is nothing to us. We don't care what the world is. What we care is what the world ought to be as human beings. What the world is not our business insofar as we want to understand how to operate with the world given the constraints that we have to operate with. Beyond those constraints, however, we make the world what we think it ought to be, arbitrarily or rationally otherwise. And the concepts are the absolute measures, and the concept is the absolute measure of norms, both intellectual, moral, habitual, all these other things. That only by the concept can we say that those things are justified and ought to be what they ought to be. So these are not abstract ideas in some other realm or whatever. It's not some disembodied reality. It's just the reality in which we exist, in which is a rational reality. Reality that makes sense to us, which is intelligible to us, in which we consent to in being rational, that we recognize as our own. Consequently, since the understanding exhibits the infinite force that determines the universal, or conversely, since it is the understanding that through the form of universality imparts stable subsistence to the otherwise inherent instability of determinateness, then it is not the fault of the understanding if there is no further advance. It is the subjective impotence of reason that allows these determinacies to remain so dispersed, and is unable to bring them back to their unity through the dialectical force opposed to that abstract universality. That is to say, through the determinacies, through the determinacies' own nature, which is their concept. So this is Hegel actually throwing a big bone to the understanding. In many other places, you will see Hegel shit on the understanding. But this is this is part of the duality of Hegelianism. You have the right to shit on everything because it's shitty, but you also have the necessity to defend it insofar as its shittiness is just what it is. It can't help it. So the understanding is what analyzes, distinguishes, and fixes distinctions. And, Hegel says that the understanding can't do anything else, that it leads to the dialectic and it can't comprehend beyond that. It's not its fault. It's not a failure of it. It is what it is. Instead, when someone who understands perfectly well just can't go beyond the understanding, we don't blame the understanding. We blame their faulty, the subjective impotence of reason. It's their reason that is faulty, not their understanding. So, what was wrong with Kant? Not that he didn't understand, it's that he just wasn't very reasonable. To be sure, the understanding does give them, through the form of abstract universality, a rigidity of being, so to speak, which they do not otherwise possess in the qualitative sphere and in the sphere of reflection. But by thus simplifying them, the understanding at the same time quickens them with spirit, and so sharpens them that only at that point, only there, do they also obtain the capacity to dissolve themselves and to pass over into their opposite. The ripest maturity, the highest stage that anything can attain, is the one at which its fall begins. Read it and weep, everybody. This is Hegel's logical argument that indeed when you hit your peak, there's only down. The fixity of the determinacies which the understanding appears to run up against, the form of the imperishable, is that of self-referring universality. Very important. The understanding cannot deal with reflex, cannot deal with absolute reflex. Stuff like the liar paradox is the understanding being incapable of thinking reflex. The dialectics is the understanding being incapable of thinking reflex. The self-undermining of the categories is the understanding's incapability of thinking reflex, and the fact that it does not recognize the undermining of the categories in being themselves, because it is incapable of thinking reflex. But this universality belongs to the concept as its own, and for this reason, what is found expressed in it infinitely close at hand is the disillusion of the finite. This universality directly contradicts the determinateness of the finite and makes explicit its disproportion with respect to it, or rather that disproportion is already at hand. The abstract determinate is posited as one with universality, and for this reason, not for itself, for it would then be only a determinate, but on the contrary only as the unity of itself and the universal that is as concept. So the finite is that which is self-limited, which in the moment it comes to be, it's also gone. It always is bounded by a prior and a posterior. Liar, not pillar. The liar paradox. Liar like liar, pants on fire. Sorry, responding to a question. So what was it? Yes, the finite is that which is, by definition, has a beginning and an end. In that beginning and end, however, the finite links itself to the next finite or the prior finite as well. And in that, it perpetuates itself as finitude as such. A finite passes, but finitude remains. This universality directly contradicts the determinateness of the finite and makes explicit its disproportion with respect to it. So, the fact that the finite, as an infinite chain of finites, makes finitude unending, and literally therefore not finite, is a direct contradiction of the finite, and that the finite as finite and a finite come into a direct contradiction right there. And does that make sense? Yeah, DM?
Yeah, I'm just reading a little about the liar paradox. I get it, and I see why you mean it, like why you say it fits here.
Yeah, or rather that disproportion is already at hand. The abstract determinate is posited as one with universality for this reason, not for itself, but on the contrary only as the unity of itself and the universal that is as concept. So, insofar as the finite is that which passes away, whereas the infinite does not, it's a particular related to a universal, and therefore, even as the understanding makes the hard distinction that the finite is finite and the infinite is infinite, and they don't have anything to do with each other, and they don't cross into each other, and they have no dependencies. The very relationship, which is the determinate relationship, brings it into the relation of concept, which is the determinate concept, as we have already seen. Therefore, the common practice of separating understanding and reason is to be rejected on all counts. There we go. On the contrary, to consider the concept as void of reason should itself be considered as an incapacity of reason to recognize itself in the concept. The determinate and abstract concept is the condition, or rather an essential moment of reason. It is form quickened by spirit in which the finite, through the universality in which it refers to itself, is internally kindled, is posited as dialectical, and thereby is the beginning of the appearance of reason. Since in the foregoing the determinate concept has been presented in its truth, it is only left to indicate what, as so presented, it has already been posited as. Difference, which is an essential moment of the concept, but in the pure universal is not yet posited as such, receives its due in the determinate concept. Determinateness in the form of universality is united with the latter to form a simple determinate universality. Determinateness in the form of Determinateness in the form of universality is united with the latter to form a simple. Determinate universality is self-referring determinateness. Determinate determinateness or absolute negativity posited for itself. Self-references. Gotta love it. But self-referring determinateness is singularity. Just as universality immediately is particularity in and for itself, no less immediately is particularity also singularity in and for itself. This singularity is at first to be regarded as the third moment of the concept, inasmuch as it is held fast in opposition to the other two, but also as the absolute turning back of the concept into itself, and at the same time as the posited loss of itself. All right, so there we go. We finished particularity. To the point of self-referring determinations. The universal as universal is particular insofar as it is distinguished as a distinction from the particular. Then the particular as particular is itself singular. It is a singularity because the particular in negative relationship to itself, the particular as against the particular through the particular, is this particular as opposed to that particular, and that is the singularity. That is the individuality. But all right, that was pretty good. 2 hours and 10 minutes, not too bad for about 5 pages, just like last time. But yes, any questions?
Can you repeat the part a little bit about where you were describing how it's a problem if somebody, I think you said, abstracts the historical contingency to assign a set of arbitrary character traits to human behavior?
That was just an example of the problems of definitional conception versus how Hegel is conceiving concepts here, where if you just abstract some arbitrary, to make a definition is an abstraction. Literally, by definition, it is a definita. Finita would be like, it is the root is finite. To make finite. To define is to make finite. So it goes perfectly well with abstraction, literally in the very concept of that. But if you have no generative references, which are absolute, all you can do is make arbitrary unifications, and whatever unifications you make are going to necessarily be dead. They're going to produce nothing. They're not going to really give you a generative principle from which you can draw out from that definition the particular and individual determinateness of human beings. So in Evo Psych, or human beings are actually no, not Evo Psych. Well, it's part of Evo Psych, but it's what is it?
Is it selfish gene or something?
Things like that, yes. It's stuff like that. It's the you choose some kind of thing and you say, okay, this is the primary determination I'm going to fix. Take, for example, the idea of sexual reproductive strategies that we're all just we're fundamentally driven by just the absolute urge of the species requirement to procreate and expand. And in particular individuals, that's the urge to continue your genes. So if that's your definition of human being, you're going to look at everything humans do according to that. And obviously you're going to go look in the empirical world and you're going to see some things that are going to correspond to your concept. And you're going to say, see, what I'm saying is explanatory and true. But from that mere definition, you're not going to be able to actually draw out the multiplicity of all the other things that humans do, and even the multiplicity of things that people do in that kind of relationship in human society. All the weird rituals that we have, dating, the ways in which we communicate with each other, the ways in which our sexuality is expressed, the ways in which it is acceptable or not acceptable to do such things. All those things, and those things themselves are just abstractions, because all these things happen within a culture, within communities, within which are living, communities of ideas. They have purposes. They don't just do things haphazardly. So in the regular definitional concept, you can't do that. Whereas with Hegel's concept, you totally can. And the proof is that Hegel did it. It's the whole system of philosophy. This whole system is the self-explanation of all of reality in one go. So you have the explanation both of the metaphysics, you have the explanation both of the natural world, you have an explanation of the internal subjective psychology and drives, you have an explanation of the objective social relationships that people come into for various reasons, of material or psychological or spiritual. You have the various ways in which various views of religion come about. You have the various ways in which various views of ethics come about. You have the various ways in which sciences come about. You have the various ways in which arts come about. And you have the various ways in which philosophies themselves come about. From the definition of the human being as just, a biological machine for for the reproduction of genes, what do you get? You just get a bunch of dumb animals fucking. That's what you get. But you're not going to get anything else.
Yeah, it's so impoverished. It's just incredibly impoverished as an explanation.
So anyways, that was the point of that. But alright, we've been gone for long enough. A good place to stop since there's the remarks. I'm not sure if I want to read the remarks. I'm going to read them on my own and see if they're something we ought to go over. But we'll see. For those of you listening, hopefully you found this useful. See you next time.